he called several months ago, wanted to know if he could come in and play around with you guys. Yeah, absolutely.
He said he wanted to, because we stayed later, he said he wanted to come back when we did the lower leg and like talk about like the vasculature.
Yeah,
and
he
stuff of it.
he said he wanted to take out the scaphoidus vein and he wanted to show us how they do the
Oh, okay.
So I
bypass.
told him you would call him.
I did the same thing.
He acts like he wanted to come back this
I'll
afternoon.
call him.
He really acted like, he was like, he wanted to come back.
Yeah, he asked what time we were going back in there.
I said,
Yeah.
He said he might have a procedure this afternoon.
Yeah, he was all about it, though. He
Okay.
made,
Well,
so, I mean,
be nice. I mean, I think it's good bringing people in like that.
I enjoyed
Yeah,
that.
it's cool.
It was cool to learn things.
This afternoon, one of the undergraduate professors here, Laura Kaufman, Lori, she teaches undergraduate anatomy, and she's in law school, I guess second floor. She wants to bring her student down to let them see the cadaver, just kind of maybe touch them, that sort of thing. She has 22 students, so she'll bring down 11, and then a couple of maybe she'll take those back and then bring down the other 11.
Can we turn the lights off and like hide?
Well, what I would prefer you do, though, is if apparently some of the students, the undergraduates, are expressing apprehension about doing this. If you happen to notice any of them getting white as a sheet, they started to stagger, help them to the floor.
That's a hard habit.
Yeah. You know, it's kind of funny one time. You always want to be, aware of the person you're working on or whatever. One time we had a small woman was doing an IV in one of the big guys in class, and she was digging around trying to find, starting that IV, digging around trying to find that vein, and he was passed out. Are you aware of your surroundings? So I'll give you a little bit of, somebody, who was it, who was it that thought they got some cadaver juice in their mouth?
I thought it was two people.
It was.
So, one year, we were just, no, I'm not sure.
Rock.
So bad. He's like, I'm not shutting my mouth.
30 minutes. Well, one year, we were dissecting, and the students ran into we were doing today's dissection, this afternoon's dissection, and they ran into a tubing down here in the inguinal area. And they asked me about it. I said, oh, that's a penis pump. And what it is back before Viagra and Cialis and, what's the other one? Before Cialis, Viagra, and, I can't remember. Anyway, they used to, what they would do is they would go in and. What did he say? They would do, the penis has three erectile tissues, two on top and one on the bottom. The urethra goes through the one on the bottom. We'll dissect the penis later on, but anyway, what they do, they go through and take out root out the cavity, the erectile tissue on the top two, and they put balloons in there, and then they run this tubing through your inguinal canal, and then there's a reservoir they put in your pelvis, and then in your scrotum they put this, it's a little switch, so when you want to have sex, you push the valve in your scrotum, you can feel it, and you pumped up your scrotum, and the fluid came out of the reservoir.
Is this real?
Yeah. And after you did your business, you move the valve back, squeeze the penis, and that would squeeze the fluid back into your arm. She's videotaping this. So, I learned that from my wife. If somebody is doing a camera at you like that, you say, "Are you videotaping me?" And they say, "No," they are. So, anyway, you squeeze the penis and the fluid goes back into the pelvis. Okay, so anyway, we're in cadaver lab, and so the students found this tubing, and they said, "Well, what is this?" I said, "Well, it's a penis pump. I'll show you." So I took a scalpel and I incised the side of the penis, and there was the balloon, so I made a cut to get the balloon out, cut into the balloon, and it was under pressure. And that saline shot right into my mouth. I have never spit indoors so much in all my life.
What did they do?
To have penis cheeks from a dead
I forgive you.
That is a true story. So, when you get a little bit of cadaver juice.
That is hilarious. I'd probably be.
That's so funny.
See here.
The whole thing's on video.
On
We can hold it up.
this side over here, there's certain anatomical landmarks. Of course, the costal margin is here. You can feel the costal margin. These two points right here are called the anterior superior iliac spines. It's an important landmark for the abdomen. You're going to use it throughout your career. The ASIS. You have anterior inferior iliac spines. We'll see later on, but these are the anterior superior iliac spines. You also have posterior spines, the little dimples you see, the women in bikinis. I don't think I've ever seen one on a guy, but the little dimples right here, you got them? That's the posterior iliac spine. What this illustration over here is to show you is that you'll notice that most of the intestinal organs, at least the important ones, some of the significant ones, your liver, your spleen, your pancreas, stomach, are all inside the chest. They're all protected by the descending nature of the ribs. Okay, so that's a pretty interesting picture here. I like that. This is the umbilicus or the navel. There's the ASIS. If you draw a line between those 2 points right there, the midway between those 2 lines, from here to here, is called McBurney's point. And we'll bring that up tomorrow, later next week. We talk about appendicitis, but that's where the pain of appendicitis comes, in McBurney's point. I don't know if you can read this. It's not on your lecture handout. It says, Larry was here, and there's a heart. I was going to put it down here, but I don't know it that well. Nobody said anything about that?
I just read it, so now you said that. I didn't see it.
Yeah, so. All right. Anatomists divide the abdomen into 9 different sectors. This picture right here, forget it. Forget this picture. We don't divide as clinicians the abdomen in 9 sections. Instead, we divide it into 4 quadrants. And you need to appreciate, or you need to know what is in each of these quadrants as we go through next week. And here are listed the structures in the different quadrants. Somebody comes in with right upper quadrant pain, the differential diagnosis would involve all of those things. It's always fun when somebody comes in, I have pain in my left lower quadrant, because the differential diagnosis of things that can be is very small relative to the other quadrants. Okay? Of course, you throw women in there, and they got all that female stuff that sort of gets in the way of this simple flat diagram. Because in females, the pelvis is continuous with the abdomen. So you need to keep that in mind. You always want to do a pelvic exam on a woman complaining of a low abdominal complaint. You always want to do an abdominal exam on a woman complaining of a pelvic complaint. Those two sections of the body are contiguous. Now, if we look at the anterior abdominal wall, the layers that you go through are illustrated here. This is the outside, here's the skin, the epidermis and the dermis. Here's the subcutaneous layer. Now, the subcutaneous layer in the skin, in the abdomen, is divided into two parts. The fatty part is called Camper's fascia. And the deep fascia is known as Scarpa's fascia. I can't see that. Scarpa's fascia. So you got Camper's fascia, which is the fat, and Scarpa's fascia, which is the more traditional fascia, overlying the three muscles of the flat muscles of the abdomen. We'll go over those in just a second. Now, internally, inside the innermost layer of abdominal muscles, there is a fascia called the transversalis fascia. It's also known as the endo-abdominal, but transversalis fascia is how most people know it. Inside of transversalis fascia is some extraperitoneal fat. You got a fat right there, and then inside of that is the peritoneum. So that's, if you were going to get stabbed, and I asked you what was the next, what is the innermost layer that the knife would go through, it would be the peritoneum. What would be the next to the innermost? It'd be the extraperitoneal fat. What would be the next innermost? That would be the transversalis fascia, and so on, and so on. Okay? The reason this is important is when you do abdominal surgery, you close the tissues in layers. You don't just loop a big hook around all the layers and close them all at one time. You close everything in layers. You close the peritoneum first. You close transversalis fascia along with the innermost layer of muscles, then the next layer of muscles, and so on until you get to the skin. Okay? So it's important to know the different layers that you run into. Now, the weird thing about this is that the subcutaneous tissue of the abdomen is continuous with your junk. Okay? So these Scarpa's fascia of the abdomen, when it comes down here around your scrotum, is now called the dartos. It's a continuous fascial layer. And then when it gets on your perineum back here, it's called Colles fascia. So understand that these are all the same fascial planes, they just have different names from where they are. The reason is, if you're in a bar fight and somebody pulls out a baseball bat and hits you in the abdomen, and you get bleeding in the subcutaneous space right here, understand that because of gravity over the next few days, that bruising is going to wind up down in your scrotum. So you're going to wind up with this big black and blue scrotum, and it just has to do with blood draining along natural cleavage lines. Okay, that's the same way you get to hit a goose egg here on the forehead, right there. A few days later, you're going to wind up with a black eye because the blood drains around the orbit in the same tissue plane. That's the same way here. Okay. We'll see the dartos later on when we have a cross-section of the scrotum. All right, so the muscles of the abdomen, kind of interesting. Let's start with A over here. There are two muscles that run up and down. In the back, you have the quadratus lumborum. That forms the flank back here. You know, a lot of times you get that that spasm back here in your back, leaning over, looking at everything all day long. Or, you know, actually you reach up to it, but anyway, you know what I mean. That right here, it's not in the midline, it's not towards the midline, because that's a rectus spinae. It's off more like in here, like, ooh, the lumbago is what you might hear, the old term, the lumbago. That's quadratus lumborum, that muscle there. In the front, there's two stripes of muscle that run right down the front here. We'll see it in a different plane here in a minute. That's called the rectus abdominis. So you have the vertical stripe in the front and the vertical stripe in the back, right? Then you have the three flat muscles. The external intercostals take origin from the ribs and insert down here into the what's called the rectus sheath. And we'll talk about the rectus sheath here in a minute. The rectus sheath and the iliac crest. The direction of fibers there is just like the external intercostals. Put your fingers in your front pockets. The internal intercostals are the exact opposite direction, like you're putting your fingers in your back pockets. And in this one right here, the deepest layer is called transversus abdominis. Not transversalis fascia, that's a different animal. Transversus abdominis is the flat muscle here. The orientation of those fibers can either be straight parallel to the floor, or they can be like you put your fingers in your back pocket. One of those two. All right? So there's three muscle sheets plus the front and back longitudinal muscles. Here's another illustration. Here's the external abdominal oblique. Now, the thing about the external abdominal oblique is it attaches down here to the iliac crest and over here into the rectus sheath. But right here, there's the anterior superior iliac spine, but right here is the pubic tubercle. So you can feel your pubic tubercle right there. So here's my pubic tubercle, here's my ASIS, the anterior superior iliac spine. The external oblique comes down and rolls under right there between those two attachment points. You see right there is the bottom of the external abdominal oblique. And you got to think of it like that. It's not a sheet that just comes down and attaches. It comes down and rolls under. So it's like a toilet paper roll. It forms a canal, right? It forms a canal by your rolled under fingers. All right, keep that thought in mind. Here's the internal abdominal oblique, right here. Fibers going the other way. And there's transversus abdominis. Now, here is the rectus abdominis muscles here. You have one on each side. They're about that wide. And they start out as different muscles that fuse during embryology, kind of like the sternal body does. And the fusion points right here are called tendinous intersections. And that's what, guys like myself with these massive rectus muscles with the six-pack, not since 1973. Anyway, that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with hypertrophied rectus muscles separated by the tendinous intersections. Okay? Here's a sort of a summary of what I just said here. And it also gives you the innervation. The innervation is through the thoracic spinal nerves. How do we know it's thoracic? Because T10 is the umbilicus, T11, T12. So the abdominal muscles are innervated by the thoracic nerves that come around and down. All right? They're not innervated by the lumbar nerves, thoracic nerves. okay? All right. Now, let's talk about the rectus sheath for a minute. When these three muscles, the external, internal, and transversus abdominis, come around, here's the rectus abdominis. So here's the muscle coming around. The external abdominal oblique will go on the outside of the muscle. Transversus abdominis will go on the inside of the muscle, the fascia of it, and the internal abdominal oblique splits it. These things meet here in the middle. Okay? And then you have one on the other side. Where they meet is called the linea alba. That's the midline where they meet, the linea alba. These membranes, or these tendons of the abdominal muscles form a sheath around the rectus muscle. Hence the name rectus sheath. And what they've done here is they've removed the anterior rectus sheath. There's the rectus muscle there. They've cut the top of it. So you're looking at the posterior rectus sheath here and the anterior sheath here. All that. So that sheath, you've got an anterior and a posterior part that encapsulates, essentially, the rectus abdominis muscle. Almost. It does that up here. From about right here up, this is the picture you get. But down, when you get below right about here, what happens is, if that's the rectus abdominis, here's the external oblique, there's the internal oblique, there's the transversus abdominis. The only thing coming behind it is transversalis fascia. So everything goes in front. So down here, there is no posterior rectus sheath. Understand what I'm talking about? Down here, there's no posterior rectus sheath. You only find a posterior rectus sheath up here. And that's what this illustrates here. Forget this top one. Right here, things are split, so you got half going in front, half going behind. Down here, below the umbilicus, everything goes in the front except transversalis fascia. That's the last thing, that's all there is to the posterior rectus sheath is transversalis fascia. All of the other muscle fascias went in, or muscle tendons went in front. That illustrates the same thing. So what it looks like is this right here. You see the green right here is the posterior rectus sheath. Right here, there's your belly button, right below your belly button. That white represents transversalis fascia. The posterior rectus sheath doesn't go all the way down to your pubic bone. If you don't understand that, let me know, because that's kind of key to the whole area. Here's another illustration of the same point. You can read this at your leisure. The place where everything transitions from here to here is called the arcuate line. So on this illustration right there, the bottom of that green right there would be the arcuate line. The free edge of the posterior rectus sheath is the arcuate line. All right. What we're going to do later on is we're going to look at the abdominal wall from the inside, and you can see that arcuate line from the inside.
It's on the os concept, correct? Or
It's
like,
what?
There's like a structure on the os concept called the arcuate line. kind of runs along the ilium to the pubic bone area.
Not the same thing.
Not the same thing?
No, no. The arcuate line here is the free edge of the posterior rectus sheath. Okay? All right. Now, if we look at the, when we dissect today, you're going to find two nerves right here in this area, right above this fold. This fold right here where your leg meets you, that's the rolled up external membrane, right? By the way, that rolled up tendon is called the inguinal ligament. Right above the inguinal ligament are two nerves called the iliohypogastric and the ilioinguinal. These nerves come off of L1. L1 innervates right here at the top part of your junk. Okay? Now, I don't really think there's a great deal of significance about these two nerves, other than the fact that the dissector makes a big deal out of them. If you find them, great. If you don't, I wouldn't worry about it too much. But note that they supply the lower abdominal wall, the lowest abdominal wall, right above your genitalia. All right, this illustrates the vascular supply of the anterior abdominal wall, which is mostly intercostal. Mostly intercostal. There are a couple of vessels, though, that you need to appreciate. One of them is at the internal thoracic artery that we found yesterday, comes down and penetrates the diaphragm, and you can find it on the back of the rectus abdominis muscle, between the muscle and the posterior rectus sheath, up here. It now goes by the name superior epigastric. So the superior epigastric is the termination of the internal thoracic. By the way, the internal thoracic also gives off branches to the pericardium and to the diaphragm, just the top of the diaphragm.
So it becomes this after the,
Once it goes through the diaphragm, it's now called the superior epigastric, and you find it sandwiched between the rectus abdominis and the posterior rectus sheath. It's easy to find. You'll find it today. Okay? It joins up with this artery called the inferior epigastric that comes off of the external iliac. It travels north to anastomose with the superior. So you have a blood supply covering the abdominal wall coming from both directions. Okay. There's another vessel down here called the superficial epigastric. This supplies the skin of the abdomen. And wherever you see these arteries, you have veins by the same name. You know when you get varicose veins in your leg, you know, you see how they're protruding, they're raised, they're tortuous, they're kind of red, they can be unsightly, they can be painful. You also have the same kind of thing in the abdominal wall if you wind up blocking the blood supply, the venous return to the liver. Liver failure, you have engorged varicose veins of the abdominal wall. It's called the caput medusae, the head of Medusa. Looks like a bunch of snakes. That's what it's called. I didn't make it up. Okay? So you can see those are superficial veins of the skin of the abdomen. All right, now let's look at the abdominal wall from the inside. So we're standing on the inside with the guts, and we're looking out at the posterior aspect of the abdominal wall. Here, so this is the rectus abdominis muscle here. There's the posterior rectus sheath and that's where it stops. See, right here, this is transverse, well, actually, it's gonna be the parietal perineum. The next layer up is gonna be transversalis fascia, but that covers this whole area. If you remove that, we're gonna see the edge of the posterior rectus sheath, and then suddenly you have no posterior rectus sheath. That's the arcuate line, right there. The reason that's important is because here is that inferior epigastric vessel coming off of here, going up, and it dives through the arcuate line to get between the rectus abdominis muscle and the posterior rectus sheath. This is the same place the superior rectus muscle is. Okay?
Is that where you would have like hernias?
We're getting there. We're getting there. This artery is important in diagnosing hernias, inguinal hernias. Now, over here on this side, there are 3 folds. When you remove the skin, remove the abdominal wall today, you're going to see 3 folds in the posterior wall. The median, with an N, is formed by a structure, an embryological remnant called the urachus. Back when you were a little bitty embryo and you had an umbilical cord, this structure connected the bladder to the placenta. So that urachus is on the inside of your belly button. Now, as an adult, I mean, when you're born, it just scleroses down. It's just a ligament, a fold. It's a ligament. That's all there is. But the embryologic structure was the urachus. Now, next to it is the medial umbilical fold. You remember that because L is lateral. Median is the one in the middle. Medial is the next one over. It's a remnant, an embryological remnant, that used to be a blood vessel from your internal iliac artery to your belly button. If you look at the, not your belly button, umbilical cord. If you look at the umbilical cord, it has 1 vein and 2 arteries. If you take a cross-section of an umbilical cord, it has 2 arteries and a vein, a big vein. The 2 arteries come from there. When you're born, these arteries become sclerosed down, and they're just folds that you can feel in the inside abdominal wall. You realize when you were a fetus, they were blood vessels. Those are the umbilical arteries, obliterated umbilical arteries. Now, the most lateral fold here, lateral umbilical fold, contains the inferior epigastric artery. Median is urachus, medial is umbilical artery, lateral is the inferior epigastric. Okay? Now, let's talk about this inguinal ligament here for a minute. There's the ASIS, there's the pubic tubercle. There's a defect in the external abdominal oblique aponeurosis there. It's like a little, it's like that, right there. And it's right here. That's called the superficial inguinal ring. The superficial inguinal ring. Notice that it opens up into the inguinal canal, the rolled up part of the external abdominal oblique aponeurosis. There's the inguinal canal. It's illustrated over here in sort of a parasagittal section. There's the canal right there. Now, if you remove the external abdominal oblique, the other muscles that are underneath it, they form these arches. The internal abdominal oblique, the transversus abdominis, transversalis fascia, all that stuff forms these arches. So understand right now, we're in the canal. There's the superficial ring, we're in the canal. Where this opens up to back here is inside the peritoneal cavity. This is called the deep ring. This is called the deep ring. That structure that's represented there is the spermatic cord.
Is the deep ring formed by the arches? Is it just like the
Yeah,
arches?
the deep ring is just back here where these arches, the lateral aspect of the inguinal canal. And if you poke your finger through there, you're going to be inside the abdomen. All right, follow me here for just a minute. There's another structure called the conjoint tendon. The conjoint tendon is where you have the two tendons of the internal oblique and transversus abdominis. They come together right here. And the reason the conjoint tendon, you need to know that, is because if you have a hernia and you have a bulge down here, it's because this superficial ring is too big. What you want to do is suture the superficial ring down smaller so things don't herniate through there. Well, where you suture them to is the conjoint tendon. So on your general surgery rotation, the answer is conjoint tendon. That's your anchor point for suturing down the superficial ring. Otherwise, you're not going to see it in the lab, but you will see it on a live person. All right, so this is the thing. This is an example of the deep ring. We're inside the abdomen again. There's the deep ring right there. Superficial ring would be on the outside, and it's right here. That would be the inguinal canal, right? Now, there are a whole bunch of things that go down through that canal in men. There's only one thing that, well, there's kind of two things that go down through it in women. Women are much simpler right there in the inguinal region than guys. Back when you were a little bitty embryo, guys, your testicles were sitting up here. Okay? They got pulled down into your scrotum. They got pulled through here. They got pulled through the inguinal canal, and they came out, bloop, the superficial ring, and then went into your scrotum. So therefore, your rings are bigger because you had a set of nuts went through them. All right? You women only have a tiny little nerve that goes through there, and a tiny little ligament called the round ligament, we'll discuss later, that you can just barely even see. Your inguinal rings are much smaller. That is why women rarely have inguinal hernias. And guys frequently do. Now, notice also the relationship with these rings, deep, superficial, to the inferior epigastric vessels. The deep ring is lateral to it. The superficial ring would be medial to these vessels. You follow me? You can't see the superficial ring because it's on the outside. By the way, this area that's bounded by the inferior epigastric vessels, the inguinal ligament, and the rectus abdominis is called Hasselbalch's triangle. I think it's H-E-S-S-E-L-B-A-C-H, Hasselbalch's triangle. It's not Kessel like in the nose with the bloody thing. It's Hasselbalch's triangle. Note that Hasselbalch's triangle is medial to the inferior epigastric vessels. It's lateral to the rectus abdominis. Here's the triangle right here. Okay? If I were to, from the outside, this is where the superficial ring would be. The superficial ring is in the the area of Hasselbalch's triangle. Follow me? All right. Before we get into hernias, let's talk about this just a second. The layers of the abdomen transmit or are continuous into the layers of the scrotum. And you can say that also about the labia majora, but the labia majora don't hold anything. They don't have testicles in them. They're just there. We'll talk about them later on, but the scrotum has the testicles and all this other business going on with it. So appreciate that the layers are continuous. What I don't want you to do is to memorize these layers like that. I don't care that you know that the external abdominal oblique is continuous with the external spermatic fascia. Anatomists get into that, but I don't think it's really important. What is important, though, the singular thing that is important, and by the way, we're going to do testicles when we do the pelvis and perineum. The thing that is important, though, is that the internal abdominal oblique muscle becomes continuous with a muscle in the scrotum called the cremaster muscle, or the cremasteric muscle. The cremasteric muscle is innervated by a nerve called the genitofemoral nerve.
Can you say that again?
The cremasteric muscle is innervated by the genitofemoral nerve. The genitofemoral nerve comes off about L2. If you have a patient who's comatose or has a patient with a spine injury, you don't have to be comatose. If you have a patient with a spine injury, one of the things in your neurological assessment of them is to do reflexes. Achilles reflexes, patellar reflexes, biceps, triceps reflexes you'll learn. There are also reflexes involving the skin. It doesn't work so well on guys. I need an umbilicus. Anybody want to show an umbilicus? You got an umbilicus I can borrow from you?
Nope, don't have one.
Huh? Anybody else want?
Nope.
No, you don't have an umbilicus?
I think she does.
I think that's an anatomical anomaly, actually.
I want to see
Let's
that.
it. Let's see your umbilicus. Lie down on the table up there. Lie down on the table. Lie down on the table. Open your mouth.
That's all you did in the gym every morning at 5:30.
Get ready for that wedding.
She wakes up and works out every
I'm gonna
morning.
tell you what,
I
if
don't
she
have
pulls
abs,
her
no.
shirt up and there's a tattoo that says Larry was here. Alright, you gotta get all the way.
That's more common in the male chest.
Okay, pull up the thing there so we can see the belly button. Alright. So this is, put your head back because you gotta relax the skin. Alright, this is, you have tendon reflexes here, right? You also have cutaneous reflexes. So we know that T10 innervates the belly button, right? So if she has a spinal cord injury, now, just relax, I don't want you to lay your head up. One thing you can do is take the end of your reflex hammer, you know, the hammer, and take it and just do, oh, she did it that time. Look up here, Blair. You gotta look at the belly button. Yeah. So what you do is, I stroke the skin, and you're not doing this so well. Well, what happened, we need another.
Blair, you're there.
Blair. Belly button.
Blair,
Blair.
blah, 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 blah.
Go, Blair.
Did you say, you don't need to say something. I'm gonna show you my average. Right, put your head back. Oh, she did. Put your arm through it. Or just pull out.
Yeah, that has a spinal cord injury, we don't know.
I didn't do it, did
got it now. Yeah, that was. It's one again.
It jumped bad, like the first.
All right, so what, she did it when she first, I mean, it was pretty remarkable. So what happens if you stroke the skin that way, the belly button will twitch towards the stroke. So we know that's T10, so T10, T9, we know that T9 is working. If you stroke this way, and the belly button twitches that way, we know that's T10, T11, okay? Now, huh?
9 is up.
Yeah, T10, T9,
Okay.
so those are the dermatomes up, dermatomes down. So you can say that the spinal, if you have reflexes working, then that's intact. That part of your cord is intact. Now, stay right there. In guys, there's another muscle there, the cremaster muscle down here in the scrotum. That's L2. So imagine her scrotum here. What you do is you take the end of the hammer and you stroke the inside of the thigh like that, just like that. You wait for a second, and that testicle or that muscle will contract on that side, lifting the testicle. It's slow. It's not rapid like a deep tendon reflex. These cutaneous reflexes are slow. But that's called the cremaster reflex in guys. Okay? It's where you can Google that. That's where the testicle will lift up because of the cremaster muscle in the scrotum. So you'll be in the emergency room. You'll need to remember that cremaster reflex.
Is that reflex kind of more reliable than the belly button reflex? Like, do people do it, would a guy do it every time?
Yes, it's definitely more reliable than the, you know, some people vary as far as their, the hyperactivity of their reflexes. So, you know, if we had time to do everybody in here, we'd find somebody that twitched like she did on that first stroke. The lowest dermatome, of course, is going to be the coccygeal, and that's to your anus. And there's actually a thing called an anal wink reflex. This is located where you look at the anus, and you stroke the anus, and it will contract towards the side of the stroke. So if you can demonstrate an anal wink reflex, who do we want to do that on?
Probably Taylor.
Taylor, come on down.
No, often.
I told you she would.
Is there a name for the
It's just called the abdominal reflex. Yeah.
The cremaster muscle is at T10? Or T
No,
or
the cremaster muscle is further down. It's like L2.
L2.
Okay. So you're testing spinal cord segment levels with these reflexes during the spinal cord injury. So, and once you get into this area, you're doing cutaneous reflexes. You're not doing deep tendon reflexes like patellar reflexes. Okay. There are other parts of this structure that you should appreciate here. The thing that pulled the testicle down is this thing called a gubernaculum. That's got to be the coolest name in all of anatomy. You are a gubernaculum.
You're holding the testes now?
That means one who is attached to a testicle. It actually shortens during development, and as it shortens, it pulls the testicle down. Your ovaries started up there too, but they just made it to the pelvis. So you have certain membranes that, as the testicle is being dragged through the abdominal wall, you see it in the line there. This seals up, you know, where it got dragged through. But understand that there is potentially a line there. that would represent the deep ring where it went through the abdominal wall. And that would, down in here would represent the superficial ring where it went through the superficial ring. But understand that there can be, theoretically, a communication between the testicle and the inside of the abdominal cavity. Okay. There's also a structure around the testicle called the tunica vaginalis. It's a double membrane sac that's around the testicle, sort of protects it a little bit. It's an embryological remnant. Tunica vaginalis, I'll talk about that in just a minute. The other pieces and parts to the testicle and the spermatic cord we'll deal with when we get to pelvis aperitif. You will see today, though, I want you to open up the spermatic cord. Here's the spermatic cord coming out the superficial ring. Now, within this cord are all these layers that you see here, but we're not going to worry about that. We will talk about, though, we will find today, the ductus deferens, or the vas deferens. Sperm made down here is going to go through the epididymis, up the vas deferens, through the superficial ring, down the inguinal canal, through the deep ring, and then inside and out. Right? It's got a long way to travel. There is an artery here of the duct, and there's also the testicular artery that you'll find inside the spermatic cord. And interestingly, wrapped around the testicular artery is this series of venous channels called the pampiniform plexus. The pampiniform plexus is a radiator of sorts that you've got this hot blood in the testicular artery. Well, the reason you have testicles in a scrotum to start with is because spermatic development doesn't like heat. That's why they're hanging down here. But then you've got this hot artery carrying hot blood. Well, if we wrap it in veins, that heat can dissipate out of the artery into this venous plexus and be carried away from the testicle, so that by the time the arterial blood reaches the testicle, it's several degrees cooler. That's also the purpose of the premasthetic muscle, is that if you're cold, it contracts, bringing your testicles closer towards your body. If you're too hot, it relaxes and let it drop to the floor, so to speak. All right. Understand this relationship where it's coming out the superficial ring. Everybody got that? And understand that spermatic cord goes back up into the inguinal canal and then back on through the deep ring. Or at least the structures go through the deep ring. The spermatic cord doesn't. This is the start of the spermatic cord right here, where it picks up all the layers of the abdominal wall. Okay? This is the lymphatic drainage of the anterior abdominal wall. A lot of it goes into the inguinal area. Some of it moves up into the axillary nodes. Here's the inguinal nodes, axillary nodes. It's not a real big deal about the lymphatic drainage of the anterior abdominal wall. You don't really run across that clinically very much, but just understand that if you wind up, if the patient comes in with, and they frequently will, oh, I got cancer, I've got these bumps, I've got these knots right here in their inguinal region, you need to start looking for infected skin that drains to that area, like a cut on the abdomen, a cut on the buttocks, a cut on the scrotum that causes a lymphadenitis in that drainage field. So while you're not going to run into a whole lot of things regarding lymphatic drainage of the abdominal wall, you better appreciate when people come in and say, I got cancer. Look at all these big bumps here in my inguinal region. And that happens at least once a week. Maybe once a month at the least, but it happens frequently. It's not cancer, it's lymphadenitis from something on your skin somewhere. You just have to know where that area drains. All right. Let's take a break, and then we'll come back, okay?